Tatra sito yatno vyasaha. Of these two, the sustained effort to be situated or fixed in the state of having a controlled and tranquil mind is called practice. So Patanjali has now stated the two things that are going to be really required to become successful in one's spiritual endeavor. And he is now addressing the first of these two principles here, this abhyasa. So he defines, or rather Vyasa, the commentary Vyasa, defines practice as the effort to control the mind. So Vyasa really defines this concentration which one should be aiming for or focus as the peaceful flow of the mind when it has become freed from its fluctuating states or vrittis. So this gives some indication what it is that we're aiming for or should be aiming for in order to become successful in our practice. We're going to hear as we progress on two kind of paths towards this. Patanjali is dealing with the first of these here initially, and for anybody that's made any real attempt to control their mind and to bring it into a focused and peaceful state, they will experience how incredibly difficult that is to actually achieve, and to do that for a prolonged period of time, even throughout one whole day, would seem to be almost like a mission impossible. So the reality is that in this process, this first of the two things that we will talk about, it's almost like a heroic effort is needed or required to actually mechanically still the mind. But as I stated, there will be other options that are presented or we will hear about from Vyasa as we progress. And when I say this, when I think of this, I'm often reminded of a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, where when Arjuna was asked or told that this was a requirement to succeed in yoga, he stated, "For the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna, and to subdue it, I think, is more difficult than controlling the wind." That's a pretty profound statement. I mean, Arjuna was no lightweight. He was an extraordinary personality with unparalleled focus and highly motivated, incredibly disciplined, and able to tolerate and bear all manners of things, not just for short periods, for many years. And yet, when he was challenged to consider this need, if one wants to progress on the spiritual path, he found it to be utterly overwhelming. So there was a very nice response from Lord Sri Krishna, and he states, Lord Sri Krishna said, "O mighty armed son of Kunti, it is undoubtedly very difficult to curb the restless mind, but it is possible by suitable practice and by detachment." And if you look at the two words that were used in this shloka. They're exactly the same words that were used by Patanjali as being the requirements, abhyasa, and here it's in the what's called the instrumental case for those who are familiar with Latin or perhaps Greek grammar. So seeing this ena on the end of it means like with practice, with determination. So I actually quoted this verse, which has just been on the screen in the last video, and I did not bring this up, but it's I think of value to point this out, and it shows a tremendous consistency that we see in the presentation of yogic philosophy, even from different schools or lineages, and that there is a tremendous amount of consistency in how these things are presented. So in relation to this verse, Vyasa, in his commentary, he uses the term sadhana, which refers to one's regulated daily spiritual practices. He defines this term practice here, abhyasa, as being of effort and energy or vigor to carry out this effort, and enthusiasm. And these were things that were needed for one to be able to actually create a practice. Satu dirga kala nairantyarya satkara sevito dridha bhumihi. When that practice is performed over a long period of time, without interruption and with devotion, it becomes firmly established. So perhaps you'd like to just take a quick note of the Sanskrit terms used and their English synonyms here. I don't think there's anything that warrants attention at this moment. But for us to succeed in a practice, first thing is that it must be performed without interruption. It's not that one can sort of engage in some sadhana, some yogic practice, this cultivation of the spiritual path for a couple of days with great earnestness, or a week, and then decide to take the weekend off and then just merge back into material existence, and then after a couple of days or a week to sort of think, wow, I need to get serious about this again, and again to try for a little time, and then again to sort of like take a break. One cannot take a break whenever one feels like it, or the mind, if it's dictating, it's time to take a break. No. If we want to, and we expect to attain the actual goal of yoga, then to be able to perform this undertaking without interruption is absolutely a requirement. We should also be prepared for the long haul. It is also really going to take a considerable amount of time to find success, and that won't be measured just in months. In all likelihood, will be probably measured in years, or as stated in some of the different yogic texts, even lifetimes to attain success. And so this all points to the need to be very committed and to have some appreciation for the very desirable outcome and the undesirable nature of the life I've perhaps been leading up to this point. So in speaking to this, there's a verse from the Bhagavad Gita that states, "And when the yogi engages himself with sincere endeavor in making further progress, being washed of all contaminations, then ultimately achieving perfection after many, many births of practice, he attains the supreme goal." So some people might find that a little demotivating, and the idea that something might take so long. But I can assure you of the fact that this undertaking is an undertaking of developing a higher and experiencing an increasingly higher spiritual taste or flavor. As that spiritual taste or flavor increases, then one is fortified and one is enthused and one becomes actually happy to be on this journey and to be on this path. I would like to point out that, and we will get into this later, it's not necessarily so that a person must undertake this journey for many lifetimes in order to succeed. That success and the speed at which one will find success we will speak to a little later in some of the shlokas. So this idea of being very devoted to this practice, and of course being devoted will happen spontaneously as we begin to reap the rewards or benefits from this undertaking. But we have to have this understanding that this is not just some trip. This is not something that we're just doing lightly because it catches our attention at the moment. There has to be a very clear understanding that this undertaking is more important than anything else that you could possibly do in this lifetime. The rest of your life and all the things associated with it are of a temporary and fleeting nature. They will all pass. They will all be ended. They will all come to an end. Even the time that you spend in this body will come to an end. And so there is a great need to understand, well, what's the alternative to engaging in this spiritual undertaking? And of course the alternative is what's called samsara, the endless cycle of repeated birth and death, and the unlimited amount of suffering and unhappiness that is associated with that, with material existence. So, it is, our practice has to be something that we become and grow deeply committed to, which, as I stated, is something that we can do when we are experiencing the fruit of this undertaking. But it reminds me of a verse from the Bhagavad Purana, where it states, in connection with the need of dedication or devotion to the spiritual undertaking, they use this metaphor. Every year the plowman plows over his grain field, completely uprooting all of the weeds. Nonetheless, the seeds lie there and not been completely burned, again come up with plants sown in the field, even after being ploughed under, the weeds come up densely. So that's kind of like the reality of what we are faced with until such time as we are experiencing the fruit of spiritual enlightenment. Enlightenment is not something that happens all of a sudden with a big flash of electricity or light and then suddenly you're self-realized. It's not that it can't happen that way, but it doesn't. It's going to be a process of almost like with a dimmer, like with a dimmer switch, you click it on and there's no light. And then as you turn it, now you see the light beginning to glow and the radiance of the light beginning to be emitted. And as you turn it more and more, it becomes brighter and brighter. And so in a very similar manner, the process towards self-realization is going to be an experience very much like this. There's one professor of the religions of India in the US, Professor Edwin Bryant, and he uses an example that's very common in different Vedic texts, the idea of maintaining like a flower garden. If you want to have a very beautiful flower garden, a great deal of work has to be done initially in turning over the soil and removing all of the grass and preparing everything and putting in the compost and things that are needed, and then the planting and then the tending of these plants. But even once they grow up and begin to bloom, there is the need to constantly water and to, from time to time, to weed in order to maintain this very pleasant picture garden of all these beautiful blooming flowers. And so in a similar manner, there is going to be a need for constant attention on this path.